Thank you for joining us today in remembering the life of Goody Glover. We're so glad that each of you took time to remember her with us. Today's event is presented by the Massachusetts Witch Hunt Justice Project, which is a project of the nonprofit called End Witch Hunts. And today's hosts are Josh Hutchinson and Sarah Jack and Mary Bingham. We are all descendants of those hanged for witchcraft in Salem, and we all do work on the podcast Witch Hunt, and Mary is our featured segment, Minute with Mary. And I'm going to put links to those organizations, the projects, and the podcast in the chat for you.
Okay, and we'll begin our presentation. Let me pull that up here.
You are also welcome to use the chat to comment or ask questions or communicate.
So who was Goody Glover? Goody Glover was the last person executed for witchcraft in Boston. She was hanged on November 16th, 1688, which is why we're observing her remembrance today, November 16th. She was an Irish widow living in Boston. In the trial, she apparently spoke only in Irish Gaelic. Cotton Mather recorded one line that she spoke in English, but otherwise always in the Irish, and he was very frustrated with that. And she was a Catholic in a Puritan colony, which might be one of the reasons why she was so believable as a witch. She was both Irish in a predominantly English society and a Catholic woman, and she was a widow. So she did not have a husband protecting her. She was a mother of a laundress. We don't know how old Goodwife Glover was, except she is referred to as old. And we don't know how old her daughter was at the time that the Goodwin family made accusations against her. She was initially confronted, the daughter, by one of the oldest daughter in the Goodwin family, whose name is given by David D. Hall and other sources as Martha. So Martha Goodwin accused the laundress of stealing some linen. Goody Glover got wind of this and did not have very kind words for Martha Goodwin. And Martha Goodwin, after she got bawled out by Goody Glover, became very ill, started to act with symptoms that you might recognize from the Salem witch hunt, which we'll get into shortly. And so Goodwife Glover was executed 4 years before the Salem witch trial. She was the last person in Boston to be hanged. She was hanged, and we'll talk more about where this happened, but it was in the southern part of town and not on Boston Common. Goody Glover has been acknowledged as a Catholic martyr. This is a plaque that sits right now on St. Stephen's Church in Boston. And you'll notice this plaque refers to her as Goodwife Anne Glover. In our section coming up on fact and lore, we'll explain why we don't believe that her name was Anne. She was recognized in 1988 by the Boston City Council. They acknowledged November 16th, 1988 as Goody Glover Day. This is part of the minutes of the City Council, where President Ianella introduced Councillor O'Neill, who welcomed Father Cheney of Holy Cross College in Worcester, and presented to him a copy of the resolution of the Boston City Council designating November 16th as Goody Glover Day in Boston, commemorating the tricentennial of her religious martyrdom here. Father Cheney thanked the members of the council for this citation in memory of a religious minority who was put to death for her religious beliefs on November 16th, 1688. And this is where the chair moved the adoption to consent to Goody Glover Day. And now we'd like to read the resolution for you. And Sarah, if you can remind me who's starting.
Sure. I'm gonna begin and then followed by you and Mary.
Okay.
And I'm reading this off of a copy of the proclamation that we received this week in the email out of the archives from the City of Boston. City of Boston and City Council, resolution of Councilor O'Neill designating November 16th as Goody Glover Day in Boston, commemorating the tricentennial of her religious martyrdom here.
Whereas 300 years ago this day in Boston, on November 16th, 1688, Goodwife Anne Glover, a penniless Irish laundress, was hanged, refusing to renounce her Catholic religion, and
Goody Glover thus became one of the early Puritan colony martyrs to the witchcraft mania, which was to spread to Salem 4 years later, and
She was executed one day after her trial in Boston amidst an atmosphere unsympathetic to her Gaelic speech and disapproving of her religious relics, found in a search of meager living quarters the widow and her daughter had. And
at her trial, without benefit of counsel, inarticulate in her defense, she was convicted of witchcraft based on charges stemming from the tantrums of a young girl.
the eve of her execution, she refused to save herself by recanting her faith, then failed to recite the Our Father and the version approved by the Reverend Cotton Mather when he visited her cell.
Goody Glover's martyrdom has been recognized by scholars, although her name never has been cleared on the records.
This past Sunday, a plaque to Goodwife Anne Glover was dedicated in Our Lady of Victory Shrine in Boston as a donation by the Order of Alhambra. Therefore, be it
Resolved, the Boston City Council, on this anniversary of Goodwife Anne Glover's death, and as a token of redemption of her name, declares November 16th, 1988, as Goody Glover Day in Boston.
as we
And
noted, there is a bit of lore here in this document. And we do know that she was Irish. The sources don't really say that Goody Glover was named Anne or that she was a laundress. Her daughter was a laundress, but Goody Glover's occupation is not specifically stated by Cotton Mather in the most thorough source, which is Memorable Providences. Um, and I wouldn't call it a witchcraft mania in Salem, but we do know that it was a witch panic and there was widespread fear there. Um, as I mentioned, the contemporary sources, either Cotton Mather's Memorable Providences or Robert Califf's More Wonders of the Invisible World, Samuel Sewell's Diary, Cotton Mather's Magnolia Christi Americana, and Joshua Moody's letter to Increase Mather. Those are the five sources that we have on from the 17th century on the Goody Glover episode. And Goody Glover's name is not mentioned. Her husband and daughter's names are unknown. There's also commonly discussed these days that she was transported to the Americas as part of Oliver Cromwell's program to relocate a number of Irish persons. However, we don't know how she got to Boston. There's no records indicating who she was exactly. Um, and so we don't know how she came to be in Boston. We do know that her husband had preceded her in death, as Cotton Mather is very clear about that. And Mary Bingham is going to talk more about where the gallows might have been. Just want to say quickly that Goody Glover, as all persons executed for witchcraft in Massachusetts, was hanged and not burned. And now, Mary, if you want to talk about the gallows.
Thank you. So on my quest to try to figure out where some of these people in Massachusetts were hanged before Salem, 1692. I did go to Boston and find that plaque with the inscription that Josh provided for us. And of course, being on St. Stephen's Church, along with a few other plaques. And I went back and I reread what the plaque states. So the plaque is maybe not incredibly wrong, because it states very clearly that near this site is where she was hanged. In reality, and what I've read for some really good secondary sources, is that a lot of times people that were going to the gallows were dragged or driven by cart through the city of Boston. So it would make sense that if she did in fact live in the North End, she would have had to travel through the city of Boston and be an example of what could happen if somebody committed crimes as she was accused of committing, and of course did not do. So then a couple weeks after, I found a post on Twitter by Dr. Emerson Baker, and he posted the Captain John Bonner map of 1722, which clearly indicated that the gallows, at least used for the accused of nonconformity and witchcraft, were at the southwest portion of Boston, leading out of town to current day Roslindale neighborhood.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, so if you notice that down to the left of the map, very, very close to where the line is, you can see the gallows and the fortification. And it's really hard to see, but it is there. And that's where we've been going out of town, leading to what is current day Roslindale neighborhood. And the History and Antiquities of Boston on page 809 indicates again that the gallows were a permanent gallows on the neck near the present burying ground on the east side of the highway. Again, I don't have a picture of the Old South burial ground, but it isn't within 2 blocks of the actual cathedral today. And then to further investigate, I needed to prove the street name changes, and a 1787 fire of Boston map from the Massachusetts Historical Society summarizes very clearly that Orange Street, which is where you see going down to where the gallows and the fortification is labeled, later became Washington Street. And then to further summarize, the Massachusetts Historical Society has a manuscript map of Boston in 1794, also indicating that the map western boundary, which ran along Marlborough Street, Newbury Street, and Orange Street, is indeed today Washington Street. The other thing I noticed and just made discovery of today is the Diary of Samuel Sewall, which is page 82 and dated June 17th in 1685. It seems that a couple of Quakers approached Governor Simon Bradstreet to enclose the common ground where the hanged Quakers were buried. And Bradstreet denied, saying it was, and I quote, inconvenient for persons so dead and buried in the place to have any monument. But then a couple of weeks later, Samuel Sewall was actually, he went to a lecture day, I think somewhere near Dorchester, but he says that on his way from I think it's from his home to Dorchester, and then later to visit Judge Stoughton at his house, he passed by the gallows and noticed that the boards were still indeed placed there to create some type of a monument for the Quakers who were hanged there. I'm going to now share, whoops, I'm sorry. Going back to Zoom, and I'm going to share this right here. Can you see my GPS map? Okay, so in the top right, if you see where it says 17 minutes, that would have been where the church was that Samuel Sewall attended meeting. And that was where Simon Willard was the reverend and where Samuel Sewall made his apology in 1692. So that's where I'm going from right now. That's may have been the area where Samuel Sewall possibly lived. And if he was going down to the red dot, which is where close to where Upham's Corner is, that's where I think I'm sorry, William Stoughton lived. I do have to double check that. But if you notice on the way, there's the Cathedral of the Holy Cross. So that is where I'm thinking that he's giving us a huge clue that the gallows were on this route. And of course, a lot of researchers are pointing to the Cathedral of the Holy Cross or that 2-block area between that and where the South Burial Ground is. And I think that's all I have for that. I am doing a lot more research on this because I certainly feel that it's so important to be able to figure out where this happened, so that we can just know where these people met their horrific end of their life, and also to pass on this information and hopefully maybe somehow maybe either move the plaque or make a plaque somewhere or some type of memorial down in the south end of Boston to show that this is most likely where Goody Glover and others would have been hanged. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Sarah, do you want to talk about the afflicted children?
Sure. Real quick before I move into that, as Mary just stated as she closed out her segment, that Goody Glover and others were possibly hanged there. There were at least 4 other women hanged for witchcraft in Boston, and none of them have had a court exoneration. So this story is all around afflicted girls, and that is a familiar narrative if you know Salem, which many of us, if we know something about Salem, we know that children were suffering. And we also had that here just 4 years before in Boston with Goody Glover. And there were other individual witch hunt situations in Connecticut colony that also had afflicted children. So we know that children coming under affliction was something that these communities were familiar with. The children of John Goodwin had extreme afflictions, and there are sources that we go into in the podcast that we released this week, which is all about Goody Glover's story. We're also going to talk about those here in a moment too. But from those firsthand sources, we hear that the children were out of control. They were unable to do their daily chores or to sometimes eat or to participate in the religious practices that were happening. They were physical afflictions that were so extreme that they seemed impossible for bodies to bend and break. And there were noises, and all the senses were being used in these afflictions. And it was very, very worrisome. They were concerned about the children's welfare and how to stop it. And if there's anything more you want to add to that, Josh.
Yeah, the symptoms are very much like what you see in Salem with those afflicted persons. There are moments where the children are barking like dogs or mewing like kittens. There are moments where they're uh, seen flying, so to speak, across a room on their tiptoes. Sometimes people don't even see the toes touching the ground and they're zipping across the room, much like Abigail Williams when she would flap her arms and say, wish, wish, wish in Samuel Parris's household in Salem Village. Less than 4 years later, she got sick. So very much the same symptoms. Writers in of the Salem witch trial histories, such as John Hale in A Modest Inquiry into the Nature of Witchcraft, he says that uh, he doesn't need to explain the afflictions in great detail because they're already familiar from Cotton Mather's Memorable Providences, where he details the Goodwin children's afflictions, and from Cotton Mather's Magnalia Christi Americana, where he details having Martha Goodwin in his home for special care.
So, one thing that could be considered here is, was this experience that happened in Boston a playbook for the children in Salem when their afflictions started? Were they taking some cues from what they had learned about affliction from the devil and witchcraft and adult responses and concerns?
And even the Goodwin children were taking cues from previous witch trials. There basically was just a way that society reflected these afflictions and acted them out, so to speak. Whether these afflictions, we can't tell, were they faking it or were they seriously psychologically afflicted? Maybe they had a psychogenic illness such as conversion disorder or something similar to that. Maybe some post-traumatic stress disorder from some unknown cause that's not in the records. Um, that's a theory for Salem, at least. Um, though I don't know if that applies here. They might have had some kind of stress induced because Cotton Mather talks about how in their household they were kept working constantly so that they could avoid temptation. And being worked that hard at that age may have inflicted some stress, or maybe they just saw this once it started. They started seeing the response of the adults to the early affliction. Maybe they saw this as an opportunity to get out of some of that work.
And like Salem, they were examined by a doctor.
They were Dr. Thomas Oakes, who was well known at the time, did examine them and say that there was, it was basically out of his hands and it was a diabolical affliction.
And then did we totally covered? Okay. I was just wanting to make sure we discussed the profile of Goody Glover, but I guess I would just want to reiterate again. So you have this horror happening in this home, and then you've had this conflict, and then you have what it sounds like is a widowed woman who speaks another language as her main language, who is an opposing religious faith, and she's mad. So you have that scenario. So she becomes this object of fear and a tool of the devil in their minds.
Yeah, you often see this as a start or catalyst for a witch hunt, where basically, or a witchcraft accusation, um, or you start out with an argument between neighbors, or in this case, it's um, an employer and an employee having, or the mother of the employee having an argument with one of the employer's children. And so you have an argument, and then something bad happens, and then you blame that on witchcraft. In this case, the bad thing happening is Martha getting sick, and then within weeks, her three siblings are also sick with her. So, argument, bad thing, witchcraft accusation. And we still see that today. I want to mention we do have a nonprofit organization called In Witch Hunts, and that's because witch hunts have not ended. Witchcraft accusations still go on around the world today, much like what happened to Goody Glover. We see those same scenarios playing out in many countries around the world.
And if you would like to know more about Goody Glover's story, we just did a fresh discussion of the sources in a podcast that we released a couple days ago. I put that link in the chat. In that episode, we do read directly from the sources on what did Cotton say about her faith? What did he say about her as a woman and as a witch? Now we're going to talk a little bit about Goody Glover in the media.
Okay, I'm going to share again. Um, this here, real quick, is an image of Memorable Providences by Cotton Mather, where he talks about the Glover or the Goodwin children's affliction in some detail. The sources, again, real quick, are a letter Joshua Moody wrote to Increase Mather, Samuel Sewell's diary, where he has a very brief entry mentioning the hanging of Goody Glover on November 16th, 1688. He's the source that gives us that information. Uh, Memorable Providences by Cotton Mather, More Wonders of the Invisible World by Robert Califf has a very brief mention of this account. In Magnolia Christi Americana by Cotton Mather, he does give a pretty detailed account of Martha Goodwin's affliction. And so here's Goody Glover in the media.
One of the, whether you call it local lore or oral history, and is a great tree, an elm that does come up. Was there an association? Why was there an association with a great elm in the hanging of witches? We don't know for sure. We do see it show itself in print, in newsprint. This also happens over in Connecticut. There is a oral history about a hanging tree there that was a great elm. And here are a couple of the news articles that we brought up this week. This is from the 19th century, referring to the elm tree, and people do associate her hanging with this elm tree. In the Boston Globe in 1926, they visit this history too. As we get closer to the modern times, some of the story becomes broader with more details. So it's really interesting. We don't consider these newspaper articles the source of her story. We consider them a telling of her story that include both lore belief and historical record. Do you want to talk about the Gaelic Society?
Oh, this article from December 1950 talks about the Goody Glover Gaelic Society, and it's named in her honor of Goodwife Glover. And they gave lessons on how to speak Irish Gaelic.
And I was gonna, so this is from the 80s, so this is a more recent article. You can pull these up when you're in newspapers.com by typing in her name, Irish witch or Irish hanged. A combination of these terms pull up these different news articles.
Yeah, and this article here was in the St. Patrick's Day 1987 issue of the Boston Globe, and talks about this Irish woman hanged in Boston as a witch. And this set in motion basically the formation of a committee to memorialize Goodwife Glover. So, yeah, uh, unfortunately, I don't have the image right now of the next article from uh, November 16th, 1987, but there were three priests who got together from the College of Holy Cross and Boston College, formed a committee to build a memorial located at the Boston State House near the statue of Mary Dyer. That Goody Glover Memorial was never built. And as they point out in the proclamation of Goody Glover Day, she's never been exonerated. None of the so-called witches hanged in Boston have received exoneration or an apology.
And this was another article here that mentioned the tree. Um, Reading this article is what prompted me to dig deeper and go and find those 19th century articles that mentioned the tree. Here is a piece of art from the 1990s. There is Goody Glover imagined smoking a pipe. At one time, this piece was in the Salem. What is that museum, Josh? I'm so sorry. Dungeon Museum?
Was it in the Salem Witch Dungeon Museum?
Yes, yes, that is the museum. I reached out to them this week to see if that was something that is still displayed, and it is not.
Oh, yes, the Witch Dungeon Museum in Salem.
Yep. Yeah. As you can see, these stories about her do surface, up through the decades. Here's one from 1994. This would have been 5 years after the proclamation. Nothing, came to fruition with a memorial.
And here we see Cotton Mather, who's essentially I would call him the non-biographer of Goody Glover because he gives us no information on her background. And he has absolutely nothing good to say about her, calling her a hag and many other unfortunate names.
Yeah, Josh is so right. When you're looking at the story that he gives us of Goody Glover, you come out with lots of information about the children, but we don't really know things that we would want to know to be able to remember her properly because he doesn't tell us them.
Yeah, he doesn't actually name the children either. So those names come from other sources.
Oh, yeah.
And this article from November 15th, 2012, on the eve of the anniversary of her execution, uh, Boston witch trial set scene for Salem. This is so true. You often see uh, the Goodwin children's afflictions credited with inspiring further afflictions happening in Salem. And because the first four women hanged for witchcraft in Boston were all between 1648 and 1656. And then you have 32 years without any witchcraft conviction, or at least hanging. There was a conviction in 1680 of Elizabeth Morse, but she got house arrest somehow. And so you saw this kind of more lenient, more we need more evidence kind of treatment of witchcraft trials, a more cautious approach, I should say, um, where there were acquittals, and when there were convictions, there were alternative punishments to execution in that 32-year window. But then Goody Glover comes along, and somehow the same judges who've been doing these trials in preceding years come and sit, and they decide with the jury that she is guilty and she must hang. And so that started things up again, basically, for witchcraft fear, which we could go into Salem, but that would take a while on why that happened totally. But this is a contributing piece of it. Oh, this is the article I was looking for earlier. Sorry, put it out of order. In honor of Goody, this talks about the priests who wanted to build the memorial. Unfortunately, none of these three priests is with us any longer, so we've not been able to establish contact with this committee. And now we'd like to have a word about the Massachusetts Witch Hunt Justice Project, which you can visit us at massachusettswitchtrials.org to learn a lot more. We also encourage you to join our Facebook group. And do we have that link for the chat?
I will grab that right now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We are currently seeking a legislative partner to take the ball and run with it in the general court. Um, so we are looking, if anybody here is a Massachusetts resident, please let us know. We would like to speak with some legislators to get their support for this. We have a petition at change.org/witch trials, which has approximately 2,600 signatures and could use more. So please, if you haven't signed the petition, please go change.org/witch trials and you'll get that. And if you have signed it, please continue to share it.
Yeah, we're actually one away from that 2,600. I keep checking it today. It's 25.99, 25.99. So we need that signature to push us up into the next phase.
Yes, thank you.
If you just real quick before we go to questions, we had the privilege of working on the Connecticut Witch Trial Exoneration Project in 2023, which was a very large collaboration of advocates and descendants and community members who wanted to see an apology and names cleared in Connecticut that ended in success legislatively, which is amazing. And one of the ways that we found that success was through the local people writing to their representatives first, but then messages from across the world came into the same legislators. So if you have a family member who's a Massachusetts resident or you are one, just sending an email or leaving a voicemail for your legislator, you can be yourself. You just tell them why you think that it would be important to acknowledge these wrongful convictions. And that can get an answer, that can get somebody's attention who's willing to propose something to move this to the next stage of memorial. I wanted to invite you to, Josh did invite you to the Facebook group. We will post in there when we have exoneration meetings. We do have those often to talk about our strategy and the responses we're getting. And before we do these questions, I'd like to do a moment of silence for Goody Glover, and we'll just do like 15 seconds. So I'm just going to put out my video for that 15 seconds, and then we'll come on back on and discuss questions, answer questions. And I'm going to start that moment now. Thank you.
And now we'd like to open up to any questions that you have. If you have a question, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
Or comments. Comments are welcome as well.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I just wanted to make sure that I had this correct when I was doing my research for last week's Minute with Mary. Um, that it was Cotton Mather says that it was Goody Glover's daughter who was accused or thought to be doing something with the linens with the Goodwins, and then they accuse her of stealing the linens, and Goody Glover gets wind of that, and then she comes in and she starts, defending her daughter. Do you have anything to say about that, or
Um,
am I totally misinformed?
no, you're absolutely right. Basically, Martha Goodwin, the 13-year-old daughter of John Goodwin, uh, was upset about some missing linen, so she accused the laundress of stealing it. And after that, Goody Glover came and basically, uh, ripped her a new one. And she was so afraid that she was being cursed that she went home and became afflicted, basically.
Thank you.
And they did accuse initially both Goody Glover and the daughter. And Cotton Mather states that they were both arrested. We don't know what really happens to the daughter.
Right. Because there is a lot of lore surrounding her daughter. There are some loose secondary sources that they say that the daughter was went had a mental health crisis shortly after, and that she died a year later. But I combed all of the primary sources that I could find and couldn't find any evidence that that had happened. And Josh, also, thank you for confirming that with me this week too, that in fact did not happen, that we know of anyways. So thank you.
Yeah, I find it interesting that Cotton Mather doesn't refer to anything like that in
Mhm.
Magnalia
No.
Christi Americana, which would have been several years after that would have happened. So it just interesting that he would have left out something so juicy and tantalizing.
That's true. Thank you.
He was basically a showman as a writer. So
Thank you. I wanted to let you know that we are a nonprofit. We are participating in Giving Tuesday. I'm going to pop that link in. Contributions for that help us with the production of our podcast and putting on events and just the cost of our technology and production.
and you can visit inwitchhunts.org to learn a lot more about our organization and about the crisis that is ongoing of witchcraft accusation related violence. The UN has passed the UN Human Rights Council passed a resolution 47.8 in 2021 calling for the elimination of harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks. And that basically means accusing somebody of witchcraft and then attacking them.
And we are also tracking cases here in the United States of people that are accusing both adults and children of demonic possession for various reasons. We have tracked right now, or tracking, about 108 to 109 cases that date back to the early 2000s at least. So we are starting to study what's going on here in the United States as well. Thank you.
And I want to say about those cases, we're tracking the ones that result in harm to the person who's accused of having the spirit or demonic possession. So these are cases where basically violence was employed to drive out the spirit or demon.
This is our podcast. We would love for you to go check it out. We're over 100 episodes. We interview experts and authors and those that have a lot of experience in the details. And it's been a privilege to be able to put these conversations together in one space. And we also bring on advocates who are working to save the lives right now of those that we mentioned that are in different parts of the world experiencing witchcraft accusations that cause harm.
Yes, and Marilyn Roach, who I see is on the call, was one of our early guests, and we'd love to have you back again um, soon if you'd like to do that. We'd love to have you. And I want to say about the podcast, we're looking at both the historic witch trials, as it says here, and we're looking at these modern witchcraft accusations. We're also looking at related issues like spiritual and ritual abuse, uh, crimes that are linked to faith or belief or tradition or some just inherent belief driven actions. And our most recent episode we did was about Goody Glover. This came out this Wednesday. Goody Glover, the full story of Boston's last witchcraft execution. And you can play this on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts, essentially. We're available. And I believe, did we have the link in the chat
It
for
is.
the episode? Okay,
It
great.
is.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mhm.
And if you'd like to contact me, you can go ahead and email me directly at josh@inwitchhunts.org. Or if you want to contact the podcast, info@witchhuntshow.com. And again, the podcast website is witchhuntshow.com. You can find all our episodes there. We've arranged them by categories. So we have a Massachusetts Witch Trials 101 series, and you can play all of that. And also our Salem Witch Trials 101 series might be of interest to you. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us in remembering Goody Glover today.
Thank you all. And if anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to stay on for a minute and we'll chat. Otherwise, just thank you so much for being here with us.